Hello, everybody. Welcome into another episode of Bolt Breakdowns here on the Guilty as Charged podcast YouTube channel. My name is Alex. As always, here to talk about a Chargers 20-9 victory over the Las Vegas Raiders to send them to 2-0, first place atop the AFC West. I think they said on the broadcast for the first time in 5 years, something along those lines. Big win, big game. Even though I kind of chalked this up heading into the game as like, all right, like they probably beat the Raiders. Still a game where, my goal of this 3-game stretch against the Chiefs, Raiders, and Broncos was to come out 2-1, 3-0. Sort of pessimistically, I was like, 2-1 sounds like the number. And maybe that still ends up being the case, but they are in a perfect position to take advantage of the first 3 divisional games and really vault themselves into contending for the AFC West. So that is something we have not been able to say in a number of years. They take care of business. We'll get into the positives. We'll get into the negatives. I think there is no better place to start than with the defensive performance. Now, going into this video, this is the first time I've actually watched the film as well as the PFF data that's come out and everything prior to making this. So I feel like my takeaways will be a little bit more nuanced than they usually are, trying to make the show how I normally do. But this was a dominant defensive performance, and particularly amidst tough circumstances too. They lose Khalil Mack very early, 11 snaps into this game, which we'll talk about, in a different context in a bit. Obviously, prayers for Khalil, who we don't know the status about. He might be back in like a month, or he might be done for the season. We're waiting for more clarity on that. It appears it was an elbow injury as he's, kind of in a sling on the sideline. We'll get more information from the Chargers, I assume today or tomorrow, or from, one of the national reporters who kind of puts injury information out. We'll see when that does come out. But they dealt with that adversity of losing Khalil Mack and honestly played really, really well as a defense. There will be stuff that we talk about with the edge room in a bit, but in stepping up in Khalil Mack's absence, all of the corners were just fantastic. Tarheeb still, I think, arguably had the best game of his career. I think you can put the Falcons game there, specifically, getting the pick 6 and all that. But he had 9 tackles, 1 tackle for loss, 2 pass deflections, and was just firing like a missile, really cracking some Raiders offensive players like we see Derwin James do on a number of occasions, or like you even see like Cam Hart really get physical. And you saw that from Tarheeb today specifically. I thought he was honestly the best defensive performer on the field. You could debate him versus Dayon, and Derwin obviously deserves a mention there. Alohi was actually the top-graded PFF defensive performer. I thought this was a very, very good bounce-back game from him. Really everyone that you can mention at the second and the third levels of the defense, I felt had a good day, particularly given coming off of the Chiefs game, you had some defensive breakdowns, certainly some safety, the one big play Mahomes had where the safety's kind of like, I think it was Molden and Alohi got a little bit cooked on the play where Mack probably should have had the sack, but didn't. So it was nice to see them all just kind of communicating, flying around, and also taking care of business on all of their assignments. And I think Jesse Minter, with as much zone as he played, as much as he was throwing at Geno, really his expectations for this defense and this secondary were, hey, we're going to bait Geno into throwing deep, and you have to be absolutely ready, when the time comes to leap on one of those interceptions to make a big play when your number is called. And the Chargers were in position. The big Alohi deflection, that kind of the interception, the Alohi deflection on the first play of the game that caused the Henley interception, the Alohi tip ball that caused the Raiders to take a field goal, the Tony Jefferson interception that he comes up with when Geno tries palming it deep. Really every time that Geno kind of tried to force the issue, make those explosive plays that he was making in week one, Minter had an answer for it, and these Chargers defenders didn't give the Raiders wide receivers or Brock Bowers any slack. And so credit to everyone in the secondary who I thought had an amazing game. And obviously can't say enough about Dayon, who, even though he says the flu game, the Jordan flu game is overrated, it's not overrated to me. He came out and had one absolute hell of an effort. 10 tackles, 1 sack on the QB spy at the end, 2 tackles for loss, 2 pass deflections, and, of course, the quarterback hit. He's come out looking great these first 2 games, and we're entering all-pro territory with Dayon. I don't want to jinx any Charger in particular, but I felt he was good enough to be a second, kind of almost like third-team all-pro last year. I think he was 7th. Not that there is a third-team all-pro, but in that voting contention for that. I think he ended up 7th or 8th in voting amongst linebackers. Those conversations are going to get louder and louder. I think as the season goes on, he has played at an incredible level, and to go out there clearly not being 100%, as was reported before the game, and he posted the picture of him on IV after the game. An incredible effort from him, and he is so critical from a green dot defensive perspective. The communication towards everyone else in the defense. We've talked about him and Derwin really leading the charge there, and I don't know how this game plays out, certainly without him in that regard, if they didn't have him for this game. So credit to Dayon there, who did an absolutely incredible job. Tarheeb, we talked about. I thought that was arguably, again, I watched the tape this morning. The way that he was hitting, the way that he was just rallying, flying to the ball, I thought it was arguably the best defensive performance of his career, even though he didn't get an interception or something like that. Derwin, couple missed tackles here and there, but overall, I think when he needed to come through at the end of the game, he came through. And generally was pretty solid in coverage, nothing like the Kelsey miscommunication that happened last week. So I think, certainly deserves some mention there. Some over pursuits, though, that, just to clean up for next game. Tony Jefferson, we talked about, comes right off the bench, comes right off the practice squad, or the opportunity squad, as Jim Harbaugh calls it. 5 tackles, 4 solo tackles. He had, 2 pass deflections, and of course comes up with the INT on the Geno Smith throw near the end zone. So, credit to him for stepping up with Molden out. Of course, I think this was a huge step, for him. Obviously, we've already known that he's great. We see him in the preseason. He played great at the end of the regular season last year. But just the versatility for the Chargers to be able to go to their practice squad and get somebody like Tony Jefferson, if one of their safeties is hurt, he remains one of the team's best, kind of low-key assets in that regard, where, no, he's not the guy that's making big safety money or, we'll talk about in that regard. But his flexibility, his willingness to be on the practice squad too, this has been talked about at the time that roster cuts were made, but there were teams that were willing to sign him to their 53-man rosters at the time that Tony Jefferson agreed to re-sign to the practice squad. So credit to Tony for there as well, and always staying ready. Alohi Gilman, we talked about him, but I just thought his timing. I thought last week he was trying to game tackle sometimes, and Alohi Gilman does this on occasion, where he will kind of try to guess on a tackle a little bit where the offensive player is going to be. I thought he was much more prepared to kind of be physical this week, make the tackles that he needs to make, and also make the, pass deflections and make the plays that he was making in that regard. The tip to Dayon that we talked about, the one on the goal line was also a great stand from him. So overall, you can go all down the list. Dante Jackson, I thought, was playing with his head on fire again. through 2 weeks, I think he's been a really, really good signing, and not one of those signings that I was necessarily like excited for when it happened, but I thought he was really, really good. So can't say I've gone 10 minutes and I've been talking about the secondary, but that's just how fucking good this first and second level of the defense, or sorry, second and third levels of the defense were in this game. Let's get to the defensive line, which I think was a mixed bag. Obviously, you can't talk about it without talking about the Khalil Mack injury. Khalil Mack leaves 11 snaps into the game. He was actually one of PFF's top 5. I think he was number 4 on their grades in 11 snaps. He was really good. He had the sack on Geno right before he got hurt, obviously. And I think the Chargers really struggled in the edge room without him. Just for context, Caleb Murphy and Bud Dupree both graded in the 40s in the PFF grades. I think that Bud didn't even get a pressure last night for as much as he did play. Let me just double check that number. Yeah, 0 pressures for Bud Dupree and also 0 pressures from Caleb Murphy or Bud Dupree. And so the Chargers are at a crossroads now. We don't know how long Khalil Mack's going to be out. Could be 4 weeks. Could be the season. We don't know. We wait and we obviously hope for the best given the circumstances and how unfortunate that injury looked. Just rewatched it this morning when I was, watching kind of the All-22 and stuff like that too. And just super unfortunate for Khalil, who, does his best to always be available. I can only think of maybe the one game he missed with the groin last year. He's been on fire. He's been great. He's been ready his whole career, and to have something like that happen to him, and as he gets older and he sees that could potentially be the last of his career, it was kind of heartbreaking to watch. So I do hope Khalil Mack can make it back in time. In the meantime, they have to do something in the edge room. I don't know whether that's a trade. I don't know whether that's a signing. Kind of unfortunate that the Eagles go sign Zadarius Smith, the Cowboys sign Jadeveon Clowney, and now you do have this Khalil Mack injury happen, and now the Chargers themselves, I think, need to make a move. Zizo Jalari is a name I'll throw out there, who is kind of a healthy scratch for the Eagles right now. Tyler and Steven, I think, will do a great job of going through all the names that are available, potentially via trade, via signing. I don't know if you sign a guy right now and then wait till the trade deadline to make a bigger move. I think there's a lot of things they could decide to do depending on what the timeline of the Khalil Mack injury really ends up being. But they do need to do something. I don't know if you can go the next 4, 8 season, whatever this Khalil Mack injury is. I don't think you can wait as long as you can do with what I saw from Caleb Murphy and Bud Dupree last night. I thought Caleb Murphy, to his credit, was pretty good in the first game against the Chiefs, but it did not look great from a pass rushing perspective, in particular last night. And I don't know if you can survive and tread water defensively unless you're getting bailed out, by the offense in what could be some pretty high-scoring games against teams with more complete offenses than the Raiders. So that is my one, fear going forward, in particular with the Centrum. I thought Tuli played okay. Was not the worst game from him. I thought he was overall pretty solid, but they just need help there. And yeah, I think it would be different if we felt more comfortable with Kyle Kennard's preseason. But one of the reasons that Caleb Murphy is playing is because he outplayed Kennard, who, is a healthy scratch, going into this year. So that's kind of, I think, the unfortunate perspective with this Khalil Mack injury. So, we'll obviously keep tabs on that, but obviously something that has the potential to change the whole, calculus of the Chargers season. So obviously prayers with Khalil and hopeful for the best for him. Just going to check my phone to see if there's been any updates on this Khalil Mack injury. None that I've seen so far. So that's about it for the defense. I really didn't have too many notes on the interior defensive line. I thought Jamari Caldwell was okay. Obviously came with the sack on the Geno fumble. Naquan Jones had a solid game overall. They did a pretty good job at being able to kind of stop and counteract the run. Sean Hand, I thought, was pretty nice. But really the story, I think, of the defensive line is going to be what do they do with this edge room going forward. So that's about it for me defensively. Let's talk about the offense, which I made the joke last week that we were starting with the offense because they came out hot, and then we'll get to the defense. We're back to doing what we did the last 3 years, basically, which was talk about the offense second because it wasn't great. Let's talk about the positives first. I did think this was a pretty good Justin Herbert game. A little bit down in the second half, I think. Worth noting, he took a shot to the head. I didn't think it was anything that caused him to be in concussion protocol. There was nothing like that officially. But he did play a little worse in the second half, just as far as being slightly more inaccurate through the INT. That probably should have been caught by the Raiders. But overall, I thought this was a really, really good Justin Herbert game, especially with how he came out in the first half. Just something to monitor, I think, going forward in terms of his status for next week, how he's feeling throughout the week. But overall, pretty good Justin Herbert game, not great. The receivers did fantastic. Again, Lyle McConkey, 48 yards on 5 catches. Keenan Allen, 5 receptions, 61 yards, and a touchdown. Quentin Johnston, 71 yards and a touchdown on a 60-yarder rope from Justin Herbert. Trey Harris gets a little active in this game, 2 for 34. So overall, you've had all the receivers playing pretty well for the second straight week. KLS was a little bit of a weird storyline in this game. There were a couple times that I noticed on tape. Obviously, he had the penalty where I think he wasn't lined up right, and then I noticed on another play that Quentin Johnston kind of pointed to him, where he was supposed to line up. And so I think he's still working through some stuff. There was the one in the Chiefs game where I remember he kind of stopped on the route short of where Herbert wanted to throw it. So I think he's still getting used to the NFL as is. There's nothing that I've seen on tape that isn't normal rookies getting used to the NFL stuff, I guess, in terms of the playbook and just how ready you have to be on game day. Similar, I'm not comparing him to Brendan Rice, to be clear, but similar things I think we saw with Brendan Rice, when he was asked to play in that Cardinals game of just not knowing quite where to be at the right time. I think it will come to KLS naturally, but that was something that I noted, on tape that I saw. But overall, great game from the receivers, who again stepped up when they needed to. Do we have to talk about the running game? I guess we have to talk about the running game. So, I kind of came on the show last week, and I was like, wow, and there was the sentiment of that Twitter was what did they do with Greg Roman? He was a revived, changed man. And I don't even think that, to be clear, the point that I'm making is not that Greg Roman was terrible in this game, but we were wow, he's he throws 10 out of his first 15 plays. He's he's passing all the time. And I think this game we kind of figured out why. The Chargers very clearly do not trust their run game yet. O'Marion Hampton was a little bit rough this game. He had a good 15-yard carry, but outside of that long run, he broke off. He had 7 carries for 9 yards, all getting stopped at the line of scrimmage. Now, that's not all on Hampton. To be clear, the offensive line was not blocking particularly well, and Max Crosby causes a lot of issues for teams that are trying to run the ball, even if he wasn't, super active from a pass rushing standpoint this game. And credit to the offensive line for actually handling Max Crosby pretty well from a pass rushing standpoint. But he was getting in there, certainly from a run defense standpoint, forced the hit on Hampton. That caused him the fumble. That gave the Raiders another chance. They also did a weird thing where they had the T's block him more than I expected. and I didn't think the tight ends were particularly good at blocking in this one, whether it was Disley, whether it was Conklin. No Fisk, who I think kind of would have been helpful in this game, to be honest. Matlock, one of his rougher games on tape, to be honest, after I thought he had a pretty positive effort last week. So there's a lot of things wrong with this run game. I don't think it is just Hampton or Harris or like just the offensive line, just the tight ends. Like it is the whole thing and how it's coming together right now. But obviously, you would like to see Omarion be a little bit ahead of where he is. This was the first game that they have given Najee and Omarion equal touches. Obviously, it was 15-1 last week. They clearly didn't feel that Najee was physically ready. They gave Hampton 8 carries, and they gave Najee 8 carries in this game. Najee, 8 for 28, 3.5 per. I thought he was overall the more consistent back in this game. Came up with a couple nice blocks, too. There was one he had on the Max Crosby offside that I really liked. Actually watching that allowed Herbert to kind of scramble out and pick up a couple of yards with his legs on what was a free play. But yeah, the Chargers are very clearly throwing the ball a lot, which is good, but it's because they don't believe in their run game. And that is unfortunately where we're kind of at. MIBPJ, the blob man on Twitter, did tweet that the Chargers are first in dropback EPA when they pass. They're 32nd in EPA per rush, even behind the Chicago Bears, who have had their notable struggles running the ball at this point in the season. And being first in the pass and 32nd in the rush is how watching the offense feels right now. I don't want to come totally all the way down from how good of a performance it overall was last week. But 3.1 yards per carry this game. You go back to last week against the Chiefs, their rushing numbers outside of, when Herbert took off with the ball, just not sustainable rushing production that is going to result in, I would say, meaningful, playoff success. At some point, they're going to have to be able to run the ball and run the ball well. I would kind of like to see more of Fisk next game, just to see if he can give you kind of something at TE and fullback, just from a blocking standpoint, because I do kind of think they're missing that player on offense right now. Disley is fine. I thought he was a little bit underwhelming this game from a blocking standpoint, and I thought the same of Conklin, but again, Crosby is hard to deal with. But, I do think they could use a little bit more, honestly, of Tucker Fisk right now was kind of my takeaway from seeing what some of the non-offensive lineman runners, run blockers did. As far as the offensive line, I didn't think this was a bad Bozeman game, but as far as Bozeman and Pipkins, as good as I think they have been at pass blocking so far, this game, I think, really showed you their limitations as run blockers, and I think their ability to get a little bit beat in that regard sometimes, and that is sort of, as much as I credit Pipkins for stepping up in the pass game, and he's done absolutely outstanding in that aspect, better than I could have expected at picking up where, Slater kind of left off with the injury. The run game is going to be where this team really struggles, I think, to put it together until sometime later in the season, whether that's they figure it out by next week or it takes them, a month to really kind of get everything ready. That was just sort of my feeling in this game. I think they are further away from figuring out the rushing game, particularly going up against the Broncos defense next week and that defensive line and all the problems that it can give you. I think this is going to be a project, but just general takeaways from the running game. I'm not out on Hampton yet. I think he's going to be fine. I thought there were, positive signs like the 15-yard run he had in this game. I think it's just going to be about for him adjusting to NFL timing and, making your cuts kind of when you're supposed to. Although I thought that was more of an issue in the Chiefs game than this game. I thought the holes just, frankly, weren't opening up at all for really him or Najee very often. But, he is a player that I think is going to, clearly take some time. I think the same. I think you probably maybe want to scale back the carries a little bit and give a little bit more on the shoulders of Najee, even if it's something like 12-10 or if it's 13-7, like whatever it is, until you really feel like Hampton is, full on like ready for it, for as well as I think Najee played in this game from snap to snap. But as a blocker, I do think he's earned, some more carries. But eventually, I do think Hampton will be fine. My concern level is not necessarily with him, rather than when they go against a premium player like Max Crosby and they don't have a Slater and they don't have great non-offensive line blockers, and there are some limitations to their offensive line for as good as they are in pass protection. I think that's going to be something that has to be kind of built and worked on throughout the year than something that's going to be immediately good, which, for as Greg Roman has talked about, imagine Justin Herbert with a run game. The run game's not there right now. I'm not saying, I'm giving up hope that it'll be there, but it's something that needs to get going just as the season goes on. A couple weird calls in this game from Greg. There was the end around to Quentin Johnston, which that play has never been successful. I don't know why they keep trying it. And then the 4th and 1 jet sweep, which was not great. I didn't love that play at all. Burned both of those in the playbook as far as I am concerned. But, again, I don't think it was a terrible day for Roman. I think it was more like an execution thing for the most part than it was a play calling thing. But those were a couple moments that stuck out to me. I was like, this was, a little bit of a weird effort. And against the team that does have more offensive success against the Chargers than the Raiders obviously had today, those mistakes could have kind of mattered and really backfired on the Chargers, particularly the 4th and 1 jet sweep call, which was like a little bit weird. Trying to think of other things to talk about from a coaching standpoint. Harbaugh opted to not use his timeouts before halftime and opted to go into halftime with the 17-6 lead, which obviously did not end up coming back to bite them. They win 20-9 in a pretty low-scoring second half. But you could argue, hey, if you were going for the jugular, but then obviously there's always the possibility that you turn the ball over and it turns into a disaster play. So I get getting the ball at the half. You're up 11, and that thought process for me was kind of fine. I didn't really think too much of it as far as I didn't think too much of it in terms of, in a different game, it could have cost them. In this game, I don't think it particularly costed them by any means. So overall, I didn't think it was quite as bad as the Harbaugh decisions from last week. That was about it from the coaching staff perspective. Obviously, special teams. Shout out to Cameron Dicker, who became the most accurate field goal kicker in NFL history through 100 attempts, beating Justin Tucker's record. That was, pretty nice to see on the whole. I did like that for him. Obviously, big moment. And shout out to Rick Lovato, who got signed to the 53-man roster. He, shows up, and for a long snapper to kind of come in when he hasn't had any time to really gel with any of the special teams guys at all, he's been nails. J.K. Scott's been playing pretty well. Dicker, I don't want the special teams to go unsullied. Shout out to Hassan Haskins, who actually had a nice special teams save tackle there at the end of the game. Did notice that. So overall, pretty good special teams week, all things considered. Thought the Chargers played field position and all of those things pretty well. Trying to go back and see if I had any other thoughts. There was that weird sequence where they were on the goal line and they went for the 3 straight runs when the run game wasn't particularly cooking. I was a little bit confused by that, and then I was also confused on that drive why they went for it on the fourth down with Keenan, but then didn't go for it on the fourth down. I guess they just thought the calculus was, hey, let's make it a 2-touchdown game instead of 11 points, and, we feel pretty confident in our defense anyway. That's not too bad. I think that's overall fine. But yeah, I would say my big takeaways for this, I thought they did a really good job at baiting Geno Smith into throws down the field, and the secondary did a great job taking advantage when they needed to. Also, tremendous job for the most part for them tackling at the line of scrimmage, rallying again, like we talked about after the Chiefs game. Pretty good game for Najee Harris. Like I said, I thought that this was a game where he did earn some more carries, even though the run game itself is still struggling. The top wide receivers were good. And overall, you have to love the pass blocking performance. Trey Pipkins, 0 pressures given up against Max Crosby. I think any Chargers fan would have taken that coming into this game. And so I think that that's overall pretty good. Their pass blocking performance, even as much as I bitched and talked about the run blocking, the pass blocking itself was pretty good. Deion Henley. I forgot to mention this when I was talking about him. I did mention the QB spy thing, but back-to-back weeks, he has had big QB spy sacks. The one on Mahomes, obviously in the Chiefs game, and the one on Geno. Great stuff from him. Run game bad, already talked about it. Jet sweep bad, already talked about it. And then, of course, my final kind of wrap-up takeaway was they need to sign an edge. I don't think they can sustain themselves. But overall, I think you have to be pretty happy with the defensive effort from that game. Things to certainly learn from offensively before they head into the Broncos, which will honestly be even a tougher defensive matchup for them. Considering, how they played coming into the season. I know they kind of struggled a little bit against Indianapolis, but that is still a defense that I think can give the Chargers some matchup problems, particularly in the run game with how that's looking right now. But overall, you have to be happy. 2-0. I think that this was a great defensive effort, like I talked about. Things to work about on offense, like I said. But overall, great game. Fuck John Gruden. Fuck the Raiders. Fuck Henry Ruggs. Fuck everyone who works for that organization, including Tom Brady, who's 0-2 as Raiders minority owner. So screw him too. Anyway, that's it for me. Bolt up. See you guys next time.